The Wasteland is as classic a setting as you can pick for one of these things, and I am normally down for that. I love games where you have to gather your party before venturing forth, and it's clear Broken Road's dev team did too. This is a traditional as hell CRPG, with isometric exploration, turn-based party combat, and really masturbatory philosophical inquiries. The game onboards you with a little ethics quiz that literally places you on a moral compass. All of that is cool, all of that I want, but Broken Roads just has an execution problem. Despite a feature list and named store page inspirations that suit my tastes, this one has not resonated with me. I've spent about 9 hours begging for it to come alive, and ended up landing on a reinstall of Wasteland 2 to scratch those itches instead. Because Broken Roads isn't terrible, it's just a little boring. I know it sounds stupid to call one of these things slow, deliberate pace is practically a core genre tenet, but Broken Roads takes forever to get to the point. I was 3 hours in before I got my first non-tutorial combat encounter, and by then I had maxed out my sharpshooter stat from all the story experience I got that I didn't even get the satisfaction of feeling that progression, and was nearly a god by the time raiders became part of the equation. The first 2 of 4 acts have you completely on a leash, following highly scripted sequences and teleporting between towns that need your help or need your subjugation depending on your disposition. You're basically a passenger until the game finally eases up the reins in Act 3 and gives you a map and some broader objectives to pursue, as opposed to just clicking around town and playing Dialogue Tree Simon Says. Let's start with some of the good though. Broken Roads' wasteland setting isn't as generic as the screenshots suggest, thanks to an infusion of Australian culture and even mythology. You'll spend time meeting with Aboriginal tribes, with a strong enough commitment to authenticity that it uses those CRPG dialogue mouse-over tooltips for Aussie slang and locations instead of fantasy lore. That is awesome, and the fact that it was made by a dev team from home turf makes Broken Roads' location feel like more of a cultural export than it does a classic video game setting. You guys gotta start calling me a legend in my own lunchbox if I get too self-aggrandizing. It's also a pretty game. Despite animations that can't always keep up with the intensity of combat and key story moments, the actual art style itself is beautiful. It ties everything together into a smeary watercolor look that's easy on the eyes. Thematically, it constantly reinforces themes of authority and community, what each of those are, and how they should be used when the wasteland has set everything back to zero. It's that community theme where Broken Road starts to get a little tired though. It beats that drum so hard, but it doesn't really tie it to any interesting gameplay systems. Almost every single town I visited followed the same format. Meet with the town elder, learn their problems, determine if you want to help or undermine their presence at the top, and most importantly, do their quests that ask you to talk to literally every single other person in town to introduce yourself. It gets real old real fast, and I think part of the problem is that this ethics pie chart was probably supposed to be commanding more of my attention than it actually did. The moral compass shifts and swings depending on the dialogue options that you choose. Most of the non-investigation dialogue choices fall under either utilitarian, humanist, Machiavellian, or nihilistic. That seldom changes how the actual mechanics of CRPG dialogue play out. You get a tree of options to pick, some are tied to your stats and background, and now some are also tied to your morality. Okay? It's cool, but not genre-redefining like its store page and some fluffier previews made it look. It does end up tying some combat boons and passive traits to your placement on that pie, which is neat, but caring about those would also demand caring about the combat, which is one of Broken Road's least interesting components. You only directly level up your character and not your party members, which is why I assume Broken Roads is so lenient about equipment. From what I can tell, there's no stat prerequisites for nearly anything. There was nothing stopping me from equipping every single party member with a sniper rifle, then literally just clicking on every single opponent in every single combat encounter right from my starting location. If ammo management and conservation or stat penalties for improper equipment were on the table, I may have been forced to pivot or make use of alternative strategies. But if there is anything in Broken Roads that punishes this behavior, I didn't come across it in my time spent. Interesting encounter design just was not a major design priority either. Most of your fights will be the randomly generated kind you get while exploring the overworld. I ended up just not engaging with them because they were strategically unsatisfying, and again, as far as I can tell, there's no punishment for just hitting the flee button every single time before combat starts, aside from the opportunity cost of not looting and getting that experience, I guess. The whole thing feels underproduced, and maybe a little too vanilla to make tolerating that underproduction worthwhile. You know how CRPGs will frequently delegate intense scenes to artwork instead of animations as a budget technique? Broken Roads does that too. but it will frequently use singular still images for minutes at a time with nothing but voiceover. It doesn't even have the decency to pan or zoom on the image. The game literally asks you to look at a JPEG for like 150 seconds on what's supposed to be dramatic scenes. The overworld map is just a triangle making its way to images representing the different locations, and it doesn't really do enough to abstract this with geography or danger or visual flourish. It just feels like a point of interest menu with extra steps, though points of interest may be too generous as well. Half the time you come across one and zone in, and there's really nothing of note happening there. One time I got the pop-up telling me I had just discovered a new place and was asked if I wanted to go there. Upon agreeing, I was met with a singular screen with the same dilapidated car model I've seen a dozen times before, and the ability to loot it and get another car battery. That's it. If this was a unique occurrence, I probably wouldn't have thought too much of it, but it's kind of a microcosm of how unsatisfying Broken Road's exploration is. There's little challenge, depth, or reward, and depending on which act I was in, I felt like I was either being linearly shepherded through tasks with no agency, or aimlessly walking around doing nothing. And without interesting character building opportunities or combat, I haven't felt too bad about walking away from this one. The reason to play Broken Roads is for its setting, and its focus on sharing Australian and Aboriginal culture, and its occasionally provocative ethical questions. But the game stringing those concepts together tries so hard to be traditional that it's just kind of bland, and fails to give me a reason to just not replay one of its muses. It's a competent budget recreation of the CRPGs that inspired it, but it lacks their depth of systems or satisfying stat-driven team building. I hope the people who may resonate with Broken Roads do find it. For me, I don't think I'll be sticking my beak in it any longer.